Whether you're in no-till or strip-till, you're probably considering using a burn down this spring in your soybeans and maybe even a couple of burn downs. So today we want to talk through some of your options and some of the newest options that are now on the market.
Let's start with the old option first, Roundup. If Roundup is still working for you in a burn down, well, it's pretty hard to find a cheaper program than that and a program that's more complete. With Roundup, you can not only kill the broadleaf weeds, but you can also kill the grasses. Now, to kill grasses with Roundup, it takes a pretty low rate, and we can still do a pretty good job. But to kill broadleaf weeds, especially as they get a little size to them, they've got quite a few growing points, and we need to have a lethal dose for every one of those growing points. So we need to use a higher rate of Roundup if we're trying to go after broadleaf weeds. To get a good kill, we need to have days that are getting up into the 70s for a high. And right away, I can hear people in the north saying, oh no, it doesn't get to 70 yet. You may just have to wait a couple days.
I'm not that concerned about that. I just want nighttime temps with Roundup above 50. Okay, so even if you're in the 60, 65 degree range, you can still get Roundup to work just as long as those nighttime temps are above 50. And certainly we'd love the daytime temps to be in the 70s or 80s. But, you know, let's face it, we're just not going to get those in many cases.
All right, if you're switching away from Roundup, you've got some weeds that it doesn't work on anymore, maybe you're switching to Gramoxone. Keep in mind, it's a totally different herbicide than Roundup. Roundup is systemic and works down all the way into the root system. Gramoxone is just going to burn off your top growth. However, there are some advantages of using Gramoxone. Don't think, well, it's an inferior product. No, it's nice in that it works very quickly. So, for example, if you need to burn vegetation down and get right out there, hey, Gramoxone is a better option than what you've had in the past. You just have to make sure you get great coverage with Gramoxone and use the proper additives.
Okay, the other thing that gets used most of the time in soybeans that we don't like to see is 2,4-D. And yes, I realize if you're going to burn down twice, let's say, and you're going to do one that's a month or even 2 months before you plant soybeans, sure, you can go ahead and use some 2,4-D. But if you're going to use 2,4-D within a couple weeks of planting, we really get concerned about that, especially as you go north in the United States. The further north you go, the cooler it is and the longer time it's going to take to get rid of that 2,4-D. So we just get worried about the 2,4-D hurting soybeans. Anymore, we don't see any reason why you should be using 2,4-D in soybeans. Just switch your soybeans over to Extend beans. Now you can use dicamba, which is actually in many cases a little bit better than 2,4-D, and it's going to be less volatile. So you've got big advantages there and reasons why I guess for me personally, I would say, hey, if I'm going to burn down, I'm switching to Extend. I'm going to throw dicamba into that mix.
Here's the other thing is, let's say you're using some metribuzin, you're using some Authority or Valor in your program. Those products have burn down activity as well. And with the proper additives, with something like Gramoxone or even with Roundup, you could really heat up that burn down application, getting products out there that you need anyway, because you're going to need residual control if you want to have good weed control later in the season.
One other thing we get questions about is, how about liquid fertilizer? Yes, if you throw a bunch of liquid fertilizer out there along with your herbicide, usually that helps your burn down. But just understand that many times there are contaminants in that fertilizer, like a little bit of dirt, for example, which could possibly neutralize some of the effect of a herbicide like Roundup.
Hey Brian, one last question here that we get a lot is, what is the right timing for that burn down? Should I do it well in advance of planting, or is this something that I could plant and then burn down afterwards?
Well, it all depends on which products you're using. So for example, if Prowl is in the mix, if you go north of Interstate 80, you really shouldn't be using that after you plant the beans. So that's going to change a little bit of my thinking. But ideally, if I could, I'd like to have my burn down be as late as possible. So yeah, it'd be great if I could plant my beans and I could use herbicides that were safe enough that I could spray maybe 3 days before those beans emerge from the ground. But if rain is in the forecast and it's also warm and you say, well, you know what, the beans might pop out of the ground in 4 or 5 days and it might be wet between now and then, well, you just can't take that chance. You're going to have to spray in advance of planting.
And of course, if you're planting Liberty Link soybeans, or even if you're not, you could utilize Liberty as a burn down herbicide too. That would take the place of a Gramoxone or a Roundup, especially in areas where you've got Roundup resistant weeds. Well, there's certainly a lot of soybean burn down options out there, and many of them could control our weed of the week. We'll show you which ones will work best coming up next.